And the other thing that I loved about open book management is that it gave us a framework to evaluate those wacky employee ideas that we had talked about before. And, I might roll my eyes if an employee came to me with like an idea for an event, for example, that I thought was a terrible idea. But open book management made me realize that I wasn't educating them. And so, of course, their ideas weren't cutting it for me. And so open book management lets you have that conversation in a way that's not personal, that is more objective, and that, again, aligns you around the goal, which is to create benefit to the company and for the employees to share in that.
This episode is brought to you by Restaurant Systems Pro.
With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, co-founder of Mei Mei Dumplings, Irene Li. Irene, my lady, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I definitely am.
I'm
glad to be here.
Psyched to have you here. And in 1 week, we had 2 people call you out to be a guest on the show. And you've been on my radar, and we're making it happen.
Yes,
so
we are.
I cannot wait to dive into who you are and how you got to where you are today. But let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
For me, it comes down to the generosity of our industry and the abundance mindset. So we can share things with each other because it's not pie. That's really what drives me, what drives all the work I do. I think when we hoard things, when we move through the world with a scarcity mindset, that's how we hurt each other, and that's how we hold ourselves back.
Yeah. And I love that mind. Dive into an abundance mindset. Why do you think and I think the restaurant industry is so guilty for the longest time of having a scarcity mindset. How do you think we got here?
Well, the industry is tough, right? The odds are stacked against us. The costs go up, and we're afraid to raise our prices. And so we are protective of ourselves. And I think that sometimes we are able to maintain the generosity mindset when it comes to our guests, because we're in hospitality, right? That's what it's all about. But that means that we feel like we have to hoard on the other end. And I just want all of us to feel like we have so much of what we need that we're dying to give it away.
What do you mean hoard on the other end? Get specific by what is the other end?
For me, what I see a lot of is the adversarial relationship between operators and their teams.
Yes.
And I've been there. I've had days where I feel like this employee called out, that employee is, having this issue. They're trying to kill me. But at the end of the day, I think we all do better when we work together, when we pull in the same direction. And I know you've had a lot of guests who share that mindset. But in the absence of really structured relationships and transparency, it's very easy to think that the other person in the room is your enemy.
That is an awesome way to get this thing started. And, my mission statement is to inspire, empower, and transform the industry. And what you're identifying right now is like the transformative part, how do we change the industry? And I remember when I started this podcast, I was afraid to go talk to people and get them to open up and share their business. Who's going to, because the industry was so guarded with their information.
Yeah.
And that was really what inspired me to do this, because I couldn't find a resource where people were sharing open information.
Totally.
So thank you so much for doing what you're doing, because the transformation is happening and it's in you. It's being you're just a shining example of it. So I'm super stoked to get going into who you are now. So how did you get here? Take us back to the beginning.
Well, I'm from a Chinese American family, and food is so central to our culture and many cultures, of course. Growing up here in the Boston area, it was always about what are we eating? What time is dinner? And when we're eating dinner, the question is then what's for breakfast tomorrow, right? Yeah. And so food has always been kind of the heart of relationships for me, of family for me. And for many years, I was just all about eating and, trying different foods. And then in college, I really fell in love with cooking.
Okay.
And going to the farmer's market and figuring out, what is kohlrabi and what am I supposed to do with it? And that just brought so much more magic into the act of eating for me. And I was like, wow, there's this whole world under the food we eat that is about how it's grown and how it's cooked and all of the people involved in that. And so that's when I started getting really interested in cooking. I watched every episode of The River Cottage with Hugh Fernley-Whittingstall, who's this incredible, just crazy British chef. And I started doing little kind of like secret supper pop-ups with my friends in Ithaca, New York.
Okay.
And then around the same time, I got this phone call from my brother. He's 9 years older than I am, and I still think I'm smarter than he is, right? And he said, I'm thinking about opening a food truck. What are your thoughts? And I said, who's going to cook the food? Not you. But, you know, he actually had been working in hospitality for many years. He was a front of the house guy. And over time, he taught me everything I know about hospitality. But he's not a cook per se. And so we ended up all reconvening in Boston in 2012. And we opened Mei Mei Street Kitchen, which was our food truck. And that's really the entry point into the professional world of cooking.
Did you ever have a job in restaurants before this?
I had one job in a restaurant before that. I was there for about 6 months as a line cook, and I learned so much. I mean, it was invaluable. But
where was that?
That was at Lamora in Brookline. It's right on Route 9. It's a classic. You know, everybody knows all about the bolognese there.
So was this closer to 2012 or closer to when you were,
Yeah, this was 2011, 2012. And then, you know, Mei Mei Street Kitchen was just a total departure from anything that any of us had ever done. It was a terrible idea. I'm comfortable saying that.
Your brother was front of house.
Yep.
And you also have a sister.
Yeah, so we have a sister who is a year younger than our brother and 8 years older than me.
Okay.
And she had an MBA. She was running a company in London, but our dad had Alzheimer's disease. And so we felt like, okay, this is a good time for us to all be at home.
Right.
So I actually took time off from school. And it started out as 1 year and it quickly became 3 years. But while we were all at home, we were like, well, what are we supposed to do with ourselves? So that's how we ended up opening a business.
Okay. So when you went to Cornell, when did because you got into your love of food, right? And like not just cooking so much, but the story behind food and sourcing food. When did that spark up inside of you?
Well, it's funny. I did live on a farm in high school for a portion of high school, and that I think kind of primed me for thinking
to get rid of you, or
more critically. It was by choice. I'm sure they were delighted to have me out of the house. But in that experience, it was called the Mountain School in Vermont. For the first time, you know, I ate meals where the person on my left collected the eggs we were eating, and the person on the right, you know, cooked the bacon, and the students who were there before me fed the pigs every morning. And so, again, like finding that magic underneath what can be a very mundane experience of like, oh, I'm just eating bacon and eggs, you know, just like any other day. That showed me that there was just so much more depth. And then in college, that's when I really started cooking for myself and learning even more about that world.
Yeah.
One other thing I'll say is like in college, initially I was really interested in kind of cultural studies and social science. And right around that time, the idea of food justice, beyond just being like a foodie, that was really starting to be part of academic parlance. You know, that was the glorious Michelle Obama era. And so really thinking about like, how does food actually play into our culture? How does it feed or address or resolve social inequality? All of that was kind of happening at the same time. And so I think that was how the worlds collided.
Right. And the reason why I'm trying to probe here is because I saw a line on, I want to say it was Prep Shift, and we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Sure.
But there's a line that like your mission is to, I'm butchering this, I'm paraphrasing, to empower restaurant owners to live their core, to be able to live their values.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, like when did that start? Like when, like, and it sounds like that was really the leading edge from all the way back as a high schooler. Like you saw like this injustice happening. Right.
I think for me, you know, identifying and addressing injustice and inequality has always been pretty core to who I am. And when we started the business, that's when I learned kind of firsthand that you can't have your principles if you can't afford them.
Right. And it's hard.
Yeah. Having values is expensive.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I grew up in like an upper middle class household. Like I was never hungry. You know, there were a lot of books in my home. My parents were both doctors. And so I came from a perspective that was more privileged. And to learn more about how, you know, all people we would like to do our best, but many of us do not have the privilege or the capital to do so. Like, that was a real shift for me over time running the original iteration of Mei Mei.
Yeah. I feel like I could go so deep into this. Why do you think that how did we get to that point? And I feel like we're kind of talking, the level of discussion we're in right now is like where we usually end up. But
sure.
I just want to get there.
Let's dive right in.
Yeah. So like, and then we'll get into the business stuff later. Like, how did society get here? That's
such a big question. I mean, many of the problems with the restaurant industry in this country, I think, go right back to slavery, that agricultural labor has never been valued appropriately in this country. And that so much of the legislation that we still have today came out of maintaining, the initial power structure in this country. So that's kind of a big statement. But all of that is to say, like, we have a lot of systems that we have used for a while, and the easiest thing is to keep using them. Yeah. But to transform and empower and to create equity, we have to address a lot of that stuff. And it's painful. And it's not easy. Otherwise, we would be really happy doing it.
Yeah. Did you ever catch the book, The Town Food Saved?
No,
it
I didn't.
Takes place in Vermont.
Cool.
And there's a quote in there, and I'm going to paraphrase the quote.
Sure.
Don't quote the percentages if you're listening to this. If I'm slightly off, please. I'm trying to do my best to recollect. But I'm pretty sure like it was like in the 1940s, like 21% of the average household income went to food.
Right.
Do you know what it is today?
I cannot imagine.
Do you think it's higher or lower?
I think it's higher, but still much lower than it is in all the other kind of comparable countries in the world.
It's way lower today.
Yeah, okay.
It's 9%.
Yeah.
So I think to kind of compound off what you're saying, I agree with what you're saying, that it's kind of been inbred into our culture, like this idea of not valuing agricultural labor. And I think over time, we as a society from like the 1960s on, we're like, how can we industrialize the food system so we can make it affordable and we can make food affordable? But over time, there was just like, we were ignorant. We didn't know what, I think the intentions were good to streamline and mass produce food and to make it affordable, but at what cost?
Right.
And we didn't know what we were doing until it had happened, and we were like, oh shit, what do we do?
Yeah. And there's still hungry people.
Right. And
so that is kind of the proof in the pudding that making things more efficient and making them cheaper doesn't actually solve inequality. And, a lot of my work extracurricularly is around hunger and around food security. And there's so many ways that I want to see the restaurant industry show up in that other aspect of food justice, not just, foodie culture, but solving these problems and actually feeding people who maybe are not customers, who don't have disposable income. So there's a lot wrapped up in that.
Yeah. So let's just cut into it. Like, what is the solution? What has to happen for us to solve this issue with food hunger?
I don't know yet. I know that certainly we need policy, and policy is one of those top-down issues that is fed by grassroots efforts. Yeah. But I also know that we have so much expertise in the food industry. We have so much infrastructure that we could be addressing school food in a much more meaningful way. We could be supporting SNAP, which is food stamps, in a much more meaningful way. I don't have all of those pieces of the puzzle, but I think that for me, just entering into that world of school food, for example, has inspired me to think about other ways that we can collaborate meaningfully.
I want to make it clear that I don't disagree that there needs to be policy. 100%. Policy needs to happen, but I think, and I want to share this with you because I want to get your feedback on what your thoughts are. I think there just needs to be a fundamental shift in culture where we start educating people, because the cool thing about culture and why I think culture is more significant than policy is that culture it changes exponentially. Policy is slow, expensive, arduous, and if you can change people's values, collective values, and you can make it cool to do the right thing, and if our social status isn't on necessarily wealth, but the impact we're making on society and what people know of our work and what we're doing, if we just shift our perspective and shift our values overnight,
I love that. And I agree with you. I think we need both of those things because,
that's why I wanted to preference that I don't disagree.
Yeah. If empowering people is giving them wings, policy is like taking handcuffs off them.
Right.
So often policy is what holds us back. And even if we are inspired, even if we have shifted our values. And so often, like, the more I learn about an issue, the more I feel like, okay, policy has to happen at the same time.
Yeah.
There's an ongoing ballot initiative here in Massachusetts. It's going to be up for a vote in November that is very contentious about eliminating the tipped minimum wage in the state. Restaurant owners hate that ballot initiative. And guess who is the top signatory on it? Me.
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I like to echo my core values in the mission statement.
Yeah.
Because that's why we have these things,
right,
so they can be echoed, right? So our mission is to change the world by inspiring, empowering, and transforming the industry.
Right.
And I do believe the restaurant industry has the power to change the world.
Absolutely.
We are so influential. Third or second most largest industry in the world. But we have so much more influence than, I would say, government and like a social influence. So I think it's government, healthcare, then food.
Right.
Right below that.
Mm-hmm.
We have the numbers to influence people and to change the world, and we have to get this kind of information out. So back to your point, you're trying to sign a bill, and who's the lead on it? Like our restaurant owner,
Yeah, I mean, I'm like the top petitioner for this ballot initiative, and the initiative is, like I said, it's going to come up for a vote in November, and there are a number of initiatives in different states that are around eliminating the tipped minimum wage. So here in Massachusetts, the tipped minimum wage is $6.75 an hour, and the full minimum wage is $15 an hour. And this ballot initiative proposes to bring those two wages into parity in 5 years.
What do you mean by that?
It means that the tipped minimum wage would step up from $6.75 to $15 over the course of 5 years. Okay. So it would go up to, 8 something, and then 11 something, and so on. The other thing that it does is it would allow for tip sharing with the back of the house when everyone is paid a full minimum wage. There are only 2 states where that's not allowed, Massachusetts and New York. Wow. In other states, you can pay a tipped minimum wage, but if you elect to pay a full minimum wage, that opens up tip sharing with the entire hourly staff. So in Massachusetts, we are being held back by 2 different things. Here's a great example, right? At Mei Mei, we pay everyone a starting wage of $15 an hour. We are electing to pay a higher wage because we think it's good for the employees, we think it's good for teamwork, and ultimately that serves the business too.
Yeah.
But because of this restrictive tip pooling law, even though we are electing to have a separate employment model here, we still can only pay the tips that we receive to the front of the house. And so even if we culturally get everyone on board with the way we pay people, we still have this pool of money that is held back because of how everyone else is choosing to compensate their teams. So
cliff note, I think this is why policy scares me sometimes, because this policy was created to protect employees. 1905? How long ago, right? We live in a dynamic world that's constantly changing. And that's what worries me about policy sometimes, is we create them in a time, a fixed point in time where it makes sense, and then the world changes around it, and then it's hard to break these. We have to put resources to break into policies. But a shift in culture where just do it because it's the right fucking thing to do, part of my language, but I like to swear to make a point sometimes, that happens instantly, right? And I agree with everything you're saying in terms of the restrictions, and I think we should just eliminate minimum wage and just let the market, what does the market need to survive?
That's really interesting.
Because when you say minimum wage, that's giving restaurant owners and businesses permission to not pay people enough. It's saying this is enough, but it's not.
Yeah, and I think what I have seen is that when we do the right thing and others are not obligated to, we are on an incredibly unlevel playing field. And listen, restaurant.
I don't know if I understand. So when you do the right thing, and others, other restaurant owners, aren't what?
other restaurant owners aren't obligated to. So for example, let's say we want to pay our staff more. So we raise our prices to reflect the higher cost of labor. If we are the only restaurant around doing that, that makes it really hard unless our guests are educated, and like that would be great.
Yeah. Well, yes.
But unless our guests are educated, if they are making their decisions purely based on price, then that puts us at a disadvantage
Right.
relative to our neighbors and our peers. And there are restaurants in the state of Massachusetts who are doing this and who are saying, we don't feel like we can compete. We need the floor raised under all of us, and then we can talk about the ceiling.
Right, right. No, I 100% agree. And I think that we live in a very special time right now because we are more privileged with knowledge today than ever before. Like everything, like we all, like no matter where you fall on the income or what class of citizen you are, we almost all have access to the internet. The majority of us do. We have access to information.
Right.
There's also lots of tools, whistleblowers out there. Media, the art, how we get influence has fragmented.
Right.
In a million different directions.
Yeah.
So now it's not about who has the most money has the message, where that's still kind of an issue. But it's easier and easier for good information to get out. And I think, to your point, I think you hit the nail on the head. The issues with the consumer and educating the consumer. And if we share this information right now, like we're doing, and get all restaurant owners to get on the same page with abundance mentality, how we started this conversation, and we say no. We, for the past 50 years, have been painting ourselves into a corner out of fear.
Yep.
And we're costing each other. We need to culture shock society and say, guess what? Enough is enough. We need to take care of people. We need to, like, where are you putting your money?
Right.
Give it to us.
Yeah.
Because you need food. Food is not, it is a commodity by definition. But it's also, it's funny how they group food. So commodity goods, right? Commodities, raw material. Food is literally life. Mm-hmm. You're saying a living animal is the same thing as a piece of metal.
Right.
It's not the same. Like, we are feeding life.
Right.
We're taking life and we're giving life.
Right.
It's more than a commodity.
It is. And I think going back to educating the guest, another piece of what makes that so challenging is that these laws about how we pay restaurant workers, they vary from state to state. And nobody knows this. I didn't know this as a restaurant business owner. So for example, I tip 20% when I eat in California or Las Vegas, and I tip 20% when I eat here. Most of us don't know that in California, there is no tipped minimum wage. In Las Vegas, in Nevada, there is no tipped minimum wage. And so we tip the same. But anyway, folks who are really opposed to this bill are servers who make great money because they work in high-end restaurants where check averages are high. And so at the State House earlier this week, there was a big coalition there called Protect Our Tips, which is stood up by the Massachusetts Restaurant Association and its parent organization, the National Restaurant Association. And they are saying, you are going to hurt servers and you're going to hurt small business by passing this legislation. And it is going to hurt some servers and it might hurt some businesses. But nobody has a God-given right to run a business that doesn't pay people enough.
Those some businesses also feed the top 1% of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And they're not paying for the food, they're paying for the experience.
That's right.
So
I think, this is a really sticky issue and we're going to come to blows over it in November, if not sooner. And all I can speak to is my experience and my values, which is I want to raise the floor under everybody. And if that means lowering the ceiling, I'm willing to do it. And what we do at Mei Mei works for us. And we have no labor shortage here. And I think that's meaningful in this particular moment in time.
Keep going. I feel like I was...
The only other thing is, I think the way things have run for a long time, I don't begrudge anybody what they've done within the system as it exists. I begrudge people who refuse to think about changing the system.
Right. I think ignorant is a negative word, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
It literally all it means is you don't know.
Right.
And how do we get people to know? We talk about what we don't know. We get vulnerable and open up about what we don't know. We fix that
Absolutely.
by sharing information.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why in early 2020, just before everything got all fucked up, we held a public event And we invited journalists, we invited diners, guests, and other restaurant owners to come to the Toast building, actually, in Kenmore Square. And we went over the Mei Mei profit and loss statement from 2019. And trust me when I say it was not about bragging, because we posted 2.2% profit. It was about starting a conversation to remind people, number one, when you go to a restaurant, you don't just pay for the food that's on your plate. And I get why people say, oh, I could have gone to the grocery store and made that for, 20% of the menu price. Like, yeah, that's exactly right, actually. 20% of the menu price. That's what we're shooting for.
Right.
And we really wanted people to be able to think critically about what it costs to go eat at a restaurant and to ask themselves, what are the challenges and constraints that are invisible to me as a diner but are shaping my experience every time I go out to eat?
Right.
And so we tried to lead with a kind of transparency and vulnerability for precisely this reason, that when we bring people to the table and we talk, a lot more can happen.
Right. No, and thank you for entertaining this 25-minute long rabbit hole straight out of the conversation. But I wanted to, I could tell, I love this stuff.
Yeah.
And I can tell that you're really passionate about it too. And this is really where it all started for you. Your origin story started with this sort of conversation.
Right.
So I think it makes sense to have this part of the conversation come early in our chat, because we still have a lot to talk about your business and how you scaled your business. And I know you are an advocate for open book management. So I'm going to try to get as much information out as you as I'm
totally
squeezing.
All right, let's go.
I can't wait. But before we come back, we're going to take another quick break, or our first, I should say, quick. It feels like we're at the end of the conversation. Our first break to thank our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
We have to interrupt today's episode to let you know that every second and fourth Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, Restaurant Systems Pro CEO Fred Langley is going live to teach you everything you need to know to run a profitable restaurant from soup to nuts. All you got to do is click the link below.
We're back, and if we're going to pick up where we left off in terms of you and your story and your timeline, your brother calls you 2011?
Yeah.
He says, I'm thinking about starting a food truck. He convinces you, the whole family's in Boston, to support dad and take it from there.
So we came back to Boston. We started researching. We started thinking about what kind of food we wanted to serve. And of course, we had to choose a name for the business. And we settled on Mei Mei, which means little sister in Mandarin, because it was our big brother, Andy, and his two extremely opinionated little sisters. So our truck hit the road, and we were so lucky to be at a perfect moment for food trucks in Boston, at a perfect moment for farm to table at a lunchtime price point. And I also think at a really good moment for Asian American food, not authentic to this region in China, but authentic to us. And I feel like the market was really ready for that. And so within 18 months, we had enough buzz and enough supporters and enough desperation to get out of the cold food truck winters that we opened our first restaurant, Mei Mei Restaurant, in the Kenmore neighborhood of Boston. That was the late 2013.
Got it. Let's dive into this 1 year period of how you did it, how you got from idea to we launched our food truck, and now we're negotiating for our first brick and mortar. Anybody who's at that point in their career listening to this, you're talking to that person right now. What were the roadblocks? What were the biggest challenges?
What I would say to that person is, I know it's chaos and I know you feel desperate, but you've got to have a plan. We had no plan in a lot of ways.
Not having a plan?
I think we were letting momentum carry us. That's my version of the story. My siblings might say something different, but we were just hell-bent on pushing forward. And in many ways, that's what allowed us to be successful, but it also made plenty of things harder than they had to be. We let the road meet us. You know what I mean? We didn't say we're going from here to there. And I think that's also what led me to ultimately buy my siblings out of the company in 2018.
I was curious about that. I was like, where are no mentions of the siblings on online right now? Yeah. On the website, there's definitely acknowledgement of where it started.
So I now have two new partners in the business, but around 2017, 2018, I started looking at what we were doing and feeling like this is a really different company from the one that we created together.
Okay.
And this company is a lot more about Irene than it's about Andy and Margaret.
I'm bookmarking 2018. 'Cause
Yes.
That's a pivotal point for you. But let's go back to 2012.
Sure.
And what I'm hearing from you, if I'm distilling the message, is, and I think this is the right approach to take early on, like there's a lot of yin and yang in this industry where like both of those pieces of advice are accurate.
Yeah.
And they're completely opposite.
Right.
Like have a strategy, have a plan, work your plan. Just start.
Yep.
You know, like complete opposites. And I think that when you're just starting, like to have too much of a plan might be, you have to be willing to because you have an idea of what you think is going to happen.
Yeah.
Then there's the reality of
Right.
what happens.
Right.
And it sounds like you were kind of just living in chaos in the beginning and trying to figure it out. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, and I think, having a plan, knowing that you will probably deviate from it, doesn't make the plan, garbage. It's still something incredibly valuable early on. What I would say is that there are different stakes for different people in this industry. And again, like I was in college, I was going to graduate without debt. I didn't have a family to support. I didn't have parents who I needed to take care of financially. And that gave me the freedom, that gave all of us the freedom to explore and fuck up and say, like, we're going to figure it out as we go. And I think so often we credit entrepreneurs with grit and courage when, like, the main difference is that they had a trust fund.
Right.
And so if you are an entrepreneur who does not have a safety net, who is bootstrapping, who cannot afford to fail, that's when the strategy, I think, becomes especially important. And so, again, I feel incredibly privileged by the freedom to live in chaos.
Right.
And the privilege to make it up as we went. That is not something that is a smart choice for everyone.
Right. And that's a great point too for everyone. And I think that like this is why I'm so hesitant to become a consultant or a coach.
Sure.
Because there is no right way to do anything that works right for everybody.
Right.
Like it's a matter of like getting as much perspective as possible.
Exactly.
And like really just crafting your own journey, which makes sense for you, your values, your resources, your vision. It's not going to be the same for everybody.
Right.
And like that's kind of the approach of this podcast is to really just to get all those different perspectives and then to hand it off to people to make their own choice based. But
Totally.
so am I right in saying that when you guys just started, it was a ready, fire, aim approach?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And, the strategy would change from day to day because a food truck in particular demands that you adapt all the time. It's raining, it's snowing.
Yeah.
You have to shovel out your spot.
Chaos.
Here in New England, that really sucks.
So what were your biggest challenges, your biggest struggles in that first year?
I think the biggest struggle was refining exactly how we wanted to structure our menu based on our culinary ambitions and also the fact that we might do 20 covers on day one and do 220 covers on day two. And, restaurants have more consistent foot traffic. And so you can design a menu and design a kitchen flow for the level of throughput that you need. But for us, like, things started out real chefy when we weren't doing that many covers. And then we had to get serious really fast.
Yeah.
And
like, is this realistic?
exactly.
Yeah.
And how do you scale from a slow parking spot where, again, you're going to feed, a couple dozen people to Dewey Square, downtown lunchtime, everyone in their suits lined up, and you've got to turn and burn. So that was one of the challenges. And of course, working out of a shared commissary kitchen, nobody likes doing that. It's like if someone else came into your apartment or your house when you left for work and they use your toothbrush and they slept in your bed and then you traded off again at night.
Yeah.
And so that, again, is part of what motivated us to find our own space.
Knowing what you know now, would you have taken the route you took with food truck to get to where you are, or would you have taken a different path?
I think the food truck route still made a lot of sense for us. We are in a sort of different moment in the market right now. And so I don't know today if I would do the same thing, but a food truck is a much more cost-effective way to get out there, to meet people, to test your product, to look for product market fit. It's how we chose our restaurant location because that had been such a great parking spot for the truck. And so I think it's still, that's still the choice I would make.
It's a great tool. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against food trucks. I think I just like to be very clear with people, or make sure my guests are being clear with people how hard it is.
Oh my God, it's so hard.
Yeah.
And it's not sustainable on its own in most cases. When the movie Chef came out, I was like, this plot is all fucking backwards because the truck solved all his problems, and for everyone else, the truck is where the problems begin. But I think that as a brand strategy, it can make a lot of sense. I have heard so many people say like, oh, I'm going to retire and open a food truck. And I'm like, I don't think you mean what you actually
that
are
was
saying.
my plan when I was like 13 years old. I was like, I'm gonna become a commercial pilot, make a bunch of money, and then open a restaurant. And then I look back at myself, I'm like, what an idiot.
And people do it and they make it work, but it's just not what you think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So going back, because you said something really good, and I think it's I want to point out, like, what are the pros? Like, why do you think that was a good starting point? You talked about market research. You talked about what were the other list those things real quick. The pros of why it was a good choice.
Yeah, I think brand exposure is the first thing. You get your name out there. You're your own billboard. Driving around the city. You want to be a good driver so that you don't create a bad name for yourself. Right. Exactly. How's my driving? And I think product market fit is critical as well. If you have, a really kind of high-end concept, but you are trying to feed 300 people in an hour and a half, like that's not going to do it, right? And then of course, like, it gives you a flexibility. If you're seeing different people every day, you can change up the concept. We served tacos, we served scallion pancake sandwiches, we served rice porridge, we served dumplings. And like, people kind of accepted that things were going to be all over the place. And that is a lot harder to do, I think, in a restaurant.
Yeah. So what was the tipping point for you in that first year where you really started to get traction and like really pick up, like, get the clarity of who you were and who you were going to become? When did that happen?
We were really fortunate in the first year that I just think people were ready for us. And we won a couple of awards. We won like a local cooking competition with like a tempura fiddlehead fern dish, which was like so Mei Mei, locally sourced, seasonal, blah, 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 blah. And that was, I think, the signal that like, okay, we could do this, and we could really find people who want to support what we're doing, people who want to eat Mei Mei every day. And that's how we started, again, like really looking at real estate and trying to figure out how to pay for it, what kind of business we wanted to have there. Would it be the same as the truck? Would it be an evolution of the truck? All of those were pretty tough considerations. And a lot of it we never really figured out, to be totally honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think as entrepreneurs, and I think I'm totally guilty of this, we always are looking to a horizon.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get there. The issue with that is once we get to that point, God damn it, there's another horizon.
Right.
And we're just constantly trying to get to the edge.
Totally.
And it's that feeling of never getting there is something that we could all be better about.
Yep.
It's not about looking ahead. It's about looking back at what I've left behind me and how far I've come.
Right.
And being present.
Totally.
And that, I think it's safe to say you and your sister and brother were able. Like, have you been able to do that?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think back to our goal when we first opened, which for me was really about ingredient quality and supporting the local food ecosystem. I really wanted to prove a point that you can eat humanely raised, humanely slaughtered beef, and it doesn't have to be a $60 steak at a white tablecloth restaurant. And at a certain point in the life of the restaurant, I felt like we had achieved that. Like, our sourcing is awesome. We meet the principles that we set out for ourselves. We're proud of what we do. And that's when I turned my attention to job quality, right? Because you can have humane beef, and if you are not humane in your own workplace with your own employees, that is a real conflict.
Yeah.
And so around that time, again, kind of 2017, 2018, that's when I said, we've done enough on sourcing. It's time to talk about job quality.
What was the word, humane job quality? Was that the word terminology you used?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like people talk about how like, well, I care about how the cow was raised, but I also care about how the cook is being treated.
But that was really clever wordage you used.
Humane jobs,
humane jobs.
Or humane employee experience is kind of what I would call it.
2017, that's where you started to focus. Is that what you said?
Yeah, because I felt like, okay, our sourcing is really good.
Yeah.
Now what?
We're bookmarking this too,
Right.
because I want to go back to 2013.
Yeah.
Because in the timeline, I I need to use timeline to keep me like I don't want to miss anything.
It's
I know
all
you
a
have
blur,
so much.
Eric. That's the real problem.
So like back to these biggest like struggles though. So you talked about the struggle of the food truck, but what about the brick and mortar? Like what was the biggest struggle with getting open in like that first year of being a brick and mortar?
I mean, permitting is always a nightmare. You can't do this piece of construction until you have that permit, until you have that inspection, until that specific guy comes in and installs this one thing. So delays obviously are just part of life building restaurants. I think in Boston, it can be particularly challenging. Another issue here is that the liquor license system, again, is deeply flawed and we need policy. To get a beer and wine license, we had to purchase one off the open market, and that was $95,000. And we just did not have that kind of money sitting in the bank. Full liquor, I should add, right now is about $550,000. And that's not going to change unless the state of Massachusetts and the city of Boston change it for us. But anyway, I digress.
I mean,
we had to raise some money. And we also had to figure out who we wanted to be. Did we want to keep being the food truck, but in brick and mortar form? Or did we want to set our sights on something that was different, that was chefier, that was more ambitious? Exactly. And we really struggled with that.
Yeah. Before we get into that struggle, I'm curious with the struggle of raising money, because this is a common, people are constantly ask me to go more into how people raise the money. So what was the number you told yourself you needed to raise to get open?
You know, I was so focused on the food side of the business at that time.
This is where your sister came
Yes,
in?
exactly.
Yeah.
This is where we let the MBA kind of, take the lead. But what I would say in particular is that we went with the cheapest everything. So we really spared every expense in a lot of ways.
But not the food.
Not the food. But in the build out, in the contractor that we chose, in the furniture and, furnishings, like we knew that we were on a budget and we paid for that in the long term, right?
Yeah.
Things break, they're not durable, you have to get things redone.
Don't buy news. Like try to find whatever you can use.
Exactly.
Or like repurpose.
Yep. And so that was one of the things we did. We also ran a Kickstarter campaign. We raised like $40,000, which feels like so much money to raise. And then it's so little money when you're spending it.
Yeah.
So that really hurts. And I can speak more to the crowdfunding that we did for this place and how we kind of evolved in that way. But I think we raised about $200,000 from friends, family, Kickstarter loans, our own savings. And it sucked. It's really hard. And you still end up with a product that could be a lot better, that you could have spent a lot more money on.
You still end up with a product that could have been a lot better, that you could have spent a lot more money. So you're still falling short of your goal, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think it's hard to raise and it's easy to spend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a question. I lost it. So back to your lane, which sounded like the food, and back to that point you were trying to make earlier with, do we stay doing the food truck stuff, doing the thing that got us here, or do we evolve again and focus on something different?
Right.
Where did you land up?
I think for a while we really pushed on doing something different, doing something that was chefier at a higher price point. And after a couple of years, we backed off from that.
How long would you say? Like 2000? So if you opened in 2013, was it around 2015?
Yeah, maybe 2015 or 2016.
So I'm going to kind of preface this because I want to know if I was right. And then when I was researching you last night, and I got really excited. I'm like, I can see the evolution. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned as a host of Restaurant Unstoppable is that you should focus on doing one thing really well if you want to make money.
Right.
And put all of your energy in being the best at that thing, put all of your marketing behind being the best at that thing, and putting systems into doing that thing, and scalability.
Right.
Is that what was happening here?
That is part of it.
Okay.
I think it was the sustainability, wanting a level of simplicity, wanting the work to be more humane, wanting the jobs to be livable, because we all have heard of and we've seen these incredibly elite kitchens where the food is exquisite and the people are miserable.
Yes. So this is back to 2017.
Just
when
about.
you said, when you started, you dialed in the food.
Right.
So you're thinking to yourself, around 2015, you're thinking about the food and how to make the process more sustainable.
Yeah.
And then from process it rolled to the people around 2 years later than that. So I love looking for evolution. That's what I'm here to do, is like to get into your head of evolution. So
totally.
So 2013 to 2015, you're figuring out the food, and then now you're trying to refine where you've landed into a more sustainable business practice. Yeah,
and I also think that I'll tell you kind of two stories. One is that at a certain point, when you're a small business, when you start out, like, you and the brand are kind of one and the same. And everything that the business does is because you like it, and it's because it's what you want to be doing. At a certain point, if you are able to grow your business and evolve it, the brand becomes something outside of you. And it might still be to your liking, or it might not. And I think that in some ways, at that point, the brand transcended the culinary or like artistic ambitions of our team. And it became more about, how do we create a version of Mei Mei that is sustainable, and not a version of Mei Mei that scratches every creative itch that we as individual people have. Right. And at the same time, I touched base with an employee of ours who had gone on to cook at one of the best restaurants in Boston, where the food is incredible. And she was really struggling personally with the hours, with the physical toll, with the way that she was being treated and the way she was expected to treat other people. And so I took a step back and I kind of said to myself, like, I guess I don't want to be the best restaurant in Boston, if that's the cost. But maybe we could be the best restaurant to work in. And that goal not only feels more within reach, but also aligns more with who I am and where I am in my life.
Are you telling me there was a cultural shift?
I think it was personal first, and then it was cultural.
But a transformation comes from the inside out.
Exactly.
Like a butterfly.
Totally. And we still struggle with this because, we hire people in who are more who are chefier, who are more about the product, the presentation, and they're maybe not thinking about process and training and making things accessible for everyone.
Right.
And a lot of times people who come from deep restaurant roots do not end up being a great fit here.
Right. It's interesting because around this time for you, I was personally going, I know we're here to share your story, but it's fun for me to reflect on my life and my evolution with Restaurant Unstoppable. I used to really focus on, to your point, I wanted to make an example of people doing sustainable food, and I recognized that there was an issue with sustainability, but I also, the more I started talking to these people, and I really used things like Food and Wine and James Beard and all these different resources out there that are shining light on these different restaurants, and those are the people I'd kind of go after because I didn't know who to make an example of.
Sure.
And I assumed those companies figured it out. But as I started diving into these companies that were getting industry recognition,
totally,
I'm like, fuck.
Yeah.
Like some of these people aren't even profitable. And I'm not saying it's all about money, but there is a certain level of fiscal responsibility that a business owner has.
Totally.
And in order to get the accolades and the attention, all these unsustainable things are necessary.
Yeah.
Unsustainable work-life balance, unsustainable culture, unsustainable P&Ls.
Totally.
Where unless you're sold out and selling $1,000 bottles of champagne, you can't cover your costs. You can't cover your expenses.
Right. The emperor has no clothes.
And talking to these successful restaurateurs, trying to get into doing what I'm doing with you, what I hope to do more of later in the conversation, getting into the numbers. I'm like, oh, you guys are making 2%.
Mm-hmm.
You're not making money either.
Right.
And it's just what is wrong with our industry? How did we get here?
Yeah.
Where I'm like, should I just stop my podcast? Or is this is this industry hopeless? And then that's where I started to focus more on small, multi-unit operators.
Right.
And opening my horizon to, wait a second, it isn't bad necessarily to be a corporation.
Right.
Franchising isn't necessarily bad.
Totally.
And there are extremes of that we don't want to replicate, but we can take the parts of that are good and eject the Mei Meis of the world into those business models with culture. And
right.
I'm ranting at this point. I didn't mean to talk this long.
No, I think that's a great point because when I started out, I would have poo-pooed the idea of being a multi-unit fast casual.
Right.
And now I see all of the reasons why that
ignorant?
makes so much sense. Yeah. And I was
too.
idealistic.
Yeah.
And you can't do it all.
Yeah.
It turns out.
Yeah. I think we're to a level we're all ignorant until you don't know what you don't know until
Totally.
you know.
And I'm someone who can only kind of learn things the hard way,
Right.
first person. My brother gave me so much advice that I hated, and now I know for a fact, because I lived it too, that he was right.
Right.
And we can send him that bit of tape. He'll really love it.
So back to between 2013 and 2015, you realize that is industry recognition and accolades worth it? Is all the stuff that we're thinking of being number one, playing the finite game, as Simon Sinek would call it, versus the infinite game.
Right.
You start to make this transition.
Yeah, and one thing that was happening for me personally was that I had to go back to school to finish my degree. And so in 2015, I kind of had this like forced sabbatical from the business. And that really did give me an opportunity to kind of reflect and take a step back. And I went and worked at my friend's butcher shop.
Okay.
Part-time, and I ate all the little dry aged ends of the beef primals, and I was just living my best life.
This is a good part of the journey.
Yes,
Let's give
this
your
was
friend
an
a nod.
amazing
Who are we
part.
talking about?
Well, her name's Heather Sanford, and her business is called The Piggery. It's no longer operating, but she sold it to another great group of operators. This was in Ithaca, New York, and I experienced life as an employee. And I had really never been anyone's employee before. And I think that also
Perspective
gave me exactly a perspective that I hadn't had about what the employee experience is like and how important it is for an employee to feel like there is clarity, there's direction, there's trust.
What?
Clarity in what it means to do a good job. I think for so many restaurant workers, like just getting through service is like, that's the win.
Yeah, I got to give a nod to my boy, Rudy Mick, right now, past guest on the show, well-known consultant. A restaurant owner's job is to create a picture of perfection of what the job done right looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that so often we just let our teams decide what success means. To them personally, maybe by department. But if we don't have an overarching idea of what success looks like, it's really hard to achieve a consistent result.
How are you going to aim if you don't know what you're shooting for?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you realize that clarity in job role and responsibility, what the job looks like, clarity, continue that train of thought of this perspective and what it did for you.
Sure. I mean, I think the other thing that it did for me was like I had so many ideas about the business as an employee. And I could also see that the business was not in a position to be entertaining employees' ideas.
Your business, Mei Mei's at this time.
No, at the Piggery.
Oh, at the Piggery.
So, it was like, I see that these duck legs aren't really moving. Like we should do a project, and like make confit and blah, 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 blah. And I just felt like, oh my God, my own employees at home have all these ideas. And we are not creating a pathway for them to share those ideas, to get feedback on them, to implement them if they're good, to share in the success if they are successful. And so it was like, there's a whole other layer of what's going on in my business that I am not privy to. And it was because I was in that layer in someone else's business on my sabbatical, so to speak.
So why is it so important to give those creative outlets to your employees? What does that do? Why is that important?
I think, number one, it just shows that you're listening to them. And it shows that you have interest in their experience. And, I think so many restaurants where people don't yell at each other are almost overcorrecting to the point of like conflict aversion. Right. And we don't always ask each other, like, what do you think? How was your day today? How was your shift? What do you think about this change we made? And so I also learned a lot, I think, about the role of feedback, which I know you and your guests talk about a lot. Yeah. And of course, I think all operators know what it's like to have employees who come to you with really bad ideas.
Yeah. Do you use EOS by any chance?
No, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. And just those like level 10 meetings,
right.
It has all these things that you're talking
right.
about baked into the model. Which
totally.
Is why I won't go down that lane because I'll save that for another conversation because there's a lot of great stuff coming out of this. So when your sabbatical's over, you finish your degree,
right.
you're back in Boston.
Yep.
You have this whole new perspective on life and business and how to run things.
Right.
What was the struggle with implementing this at your restaurant, if there was one?
I think there were so many struggles. I mean, honestly, it's hard for me to remember this time in my life. One other thing that happened is that our dad passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And so on some level, it was like being slapped in the face with brand new perspective. And thinking like, what really is important to us? And we also got this award from Food and Wine that was not Best New Chefs or Best New Restaurant. It was like 19 great restaurants to work for.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that was just like a different dopamine center in my brain, I guess. And that also was like a signal, like maybe we're onto something with this other strategy, with this other aspiration about workplace culture and job quality. The struggle, I think, in large part was how to transition the team's thinking to say, hey, we were really trying to do that, and now we're going to try to do something else. And what it took was going back to our numbers.
That being trying to be number one versus trying to be the best place to work.
Yeah, exactly. And so we really started to orient ourselves around the P&L and to let the P&L tell us what to do. And for the first many years of the business, I didn't want to look at the financials. I wasn't that interested. As long as like people's paychecks weren't bouncing, I was like, okay, things are fine and we can keep aspiring to what we're aspiring to.
I feel like you and I are cut from the same cloth.
I think we are.
I'm right there with you, but it's so important.
Right. And so when I finally was educated myself, was educated by my team members, by people outside of our team about what the P&L can really tell you, that changed my life.
What can the P&L really tell you?
It can tell you so much. It has all your secrets baked into it.
Numbers don't lie.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of times operators look at a P&L that has like 200 lines. And it's like, okay, I can't interpret that without a fine-tooth comb. And I don't have time for that because, something's literally or figuratively on fire. Right. But when you look at like the 5 line, which for us is, top line COGS, direct labor, overheads, NOP. When you look at the 5 line over time, you can see a lot of things. You can see, we hired and trained a bunch of people that month. Or the weather was really bad and so our overheads ballooned. Or we have to push top line because every time we push top line, bottom line grows. Or we have to push this element of the top line, catering. It's all about catering, right? And so it got to the point where every month I was like so excited to see the P&L. I was like, is it ready yet?
Yeah.
Like, I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to see if the savings on this line generated more NOP or, for example.
What's NOP?
NOP is net operating profit. So we talk about net operating profit because we try to segregate out profit that is not directly related to the operations of the business for management purposes. Of course, you might have one P&L for kind of tax purposes, but to really look at the operations of the business, that might be a different version of the P&L.
Did I hear you say before the recording, or maybe it was during the recording, that you profit first?
We are not profit first, although I am familiar with the operating system.
So you have when you talk about net operating profit, you're talking about the 10 to 20% that you put away that goes towards pockets. Or do you do profit sharing?
We did profit sharing in the past, but we don't like segregate it in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys have owner's pay?
The way Profit First does. The owners are salaried here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be owner's pay.
Yeah.
So you're accounting for your salary.
Yep.
Yeah. So what happens with profit? Does that go away to like buy assets or to pay debt?
Yeah, so the profit is primarily just reinvested back into the business. Debt service would be a use of profit that was less of an issue in old Mei Mei and is now a big issue in current Mei Mei because we're here in this much bigger brand new space.
Right. But the thing is, like, you need to put money aside to, like, there's truth to it takes money to make money.
Right.
And cash flow determines growth.
Yep.
So when you segregate cash flow, you know exactly what you're working with to invest in that. Like, we need we need a catering truck. Right. Okay, well, how much is that going to cost?
Right.
Okay, well, let's put aside our profit to buy that asset so we can now focus on top line revenue.
Exactly.
So, like, this is how, like, you got to allocate cash flow to grow, and that's what determines your growth. And a lot of people get in trouble because they want to grow, they want to focus on top line, but they don't have the cash flow to do it. Right. And then that is your governor.
Totally.
This is what you have. allocate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things in Prep Shift, which is our consulting and technical assistance business, one of the other things we see is that if you grow top line, but your expenses aren't under control, you're just going to lose money faster.
Right.
And that is like a really scary situation for restaurants to be in right now.
Let's get into that. How, like, what you started to do. So when did you have this realization that top line or bottom line is just as, if not more important than top line?
Probably around 2018, which is
Okay.
when we fully implemented open book management.
Okay, that
at
was
Mei
my
Mei.
follow-up
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
So, so many questions for you. I'm loving this conversation. I really am.
Me too.
So, okay, let's just go there. So, like, 2018, you realize that your bottom line, your operating costs, there's money going places you don't know. There's leaks. How did you come to that realization? Like, what tools and resources were you leveraging to realize that you could do better with bottom line?
Honestly, it was one of our employees who was a manager who did our bookkeeping. His name's Caden. He was with the company for almost 9 years. And he basically pulled me aside and said, listen, like there's a lot that you're not seeing. And so he educated me about how to read a P&L, how
Also,
to understand industry benchmarks.
Bravo on letting that bottom up flow happen.
Yeah, and credit to him for
Yeah.
managing up.
Yeah.
He was in my wedding party. I love him so much, and he loves me, and that's why he stuck around for so long. But he really opened my eyes to another, again, it's all about layers for me, like another layer of what's happening in the business and another way to look at the business. And that was happening at the same time that we were doing a big hiring push. We interviewed and offered a job to this wonderful applicant who would have been such a good cultural fit for us, who really aligned with our policy around sourcing and
Time out.
ingredients.
I have that same apron at my house. And I
Yeah.
just got it. Same colors, everything. Sorry. What's the name of that company? Headley
and Bennett.
Headley and Bennett.
Yeah.
Thank you for the apron, guys.
Yes.
Those are
Quick
good colors
plug.
on you.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, I have ADD. Did you know that?
All good. All good.
So please continue your amazing advice. My listeners are like, God damn it, she was on a roll.
So we made a job offer to someone who we thought she was a shoo-in. We felt like we were such a better opportunity for her than her current restaurant job. And then she turned us down. And I said, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I have to ask why. And she said, even though I'm not crazy about the place where I work, we have this really cool program where I actually get to learn about how the business functions. And I'm working on this project where if I can save money on plastic cups, I get to keep that money. And I already know that at the end of the year, I'm going to get a profit share from the business. And I was like, I can't fucking compete with that.
Yeah.
Like, I want to go work there.
Right.
And if I can't have you come work at Mei Mei, I want that program that is keeping you at this restaurant. I want that for Mei Mei.
So what you're getting into right now, I think the best book that I'm aware of that talks about this is The Great Game of Business.
Yep.
By Jack Stack. And they get into gamification. That's really what the numbers do.
Right.
Is it enables you to keep score and to gamify the business, where you can now bring in the whole team and say, you have a whole new, like earlier today, you were talking about by getting in the shoes of the employee, you got a whole new perspective of your business.
Right.
Your employees have their perspectives too, and they're seeing things from in your business that you would never know.
Totally.
So like you think you have the best system, but let it be broken, let it be challenged,
Right.
And that's where like profit sharing gets so important, or like profit first gets really cool, because you're allocating. Oh, if we can increase profit, now we can take some of that profit, instead of just putting it all towards paying off debt or assets, we can share it.
Right.
And now you're incentivizing people to win the game of business.
Yep.
And they're learning, and it's never ending evolution. Am I taking the words out of your mouth? Sorry if I'm getting too.
No, not at all. I think Great Game of Business and also Zing Train from Zingerman's, like those are sort of the gold standards in open book management. The work we do now in Prep Shift is a slightly more lightweight version of what they teach, because like they're for they're for A+ students. And like, there are a lot of OBM dropouts out there. And I think that restaurants in particular have to kind of take what works for them without necessarily, chugging all the Kool-Aid.
Right.
But going back to that time in 2018, I was learning more about the numbers. We had tried to hire this person and gotten instead an incredible referral to this business operating system. And also, I was still thinking about how do we do better for our employees. I was even looking into employee stock ownership. I was thinking about eliminating tips and raising wages across the board. I just felt like I need to do more and I have to find the right tool. And what really attracted me to open book management was that, again, it led from an abundance mindset, which is if we can create more for the business, that will create more for the employees. It didn't feel like the business has to make a sacrifice for the employees to benefit. And so we can all win at the same time. And our guests, not to mention, will win because happy employees provide better guest experience.
Yeah,
like
100.
How simple is that?
For sure.
And so that really attracted me to this concept of open book management because it aligned with where I was personally, with where our staff was, and with where our business was.
Open book management was the tool.
Yes.
The philosophical tool.
Yes.
What about the actual tangible tools? Like, what did your tech stack look like in 2015 when you started looking or thinking like this? And how did that change over like throughout 2015 and eclipsing 2018 to get better at managing the numbers?
I mean, we were a very Google Drive based business for a long time, and we still are actually in a lot of ways. One weird thing is that we were Toast's first customer.
Holy cow.
That wasn't a direct blood relative of a Toast founder.
You guys should have like is there like your faces on the wall there somewhere at Toast?
I think I'm all over the website
Okay,
still. But we certainly relied very heavily on Toast. We relied really heavily on Slack for team communication. One thing that I say a lot is like OBM is not a silver bullet. Open book management is not going to fix a toxic culture. You have to have like a fertile ground to implement open book management, and clear channels of communication I think are one of the most critical pieces of that. So like we were talking to each other all the time already, and that made it easier to slot open book management in. We worked with some consultants who helped us get a grant from the state of Massachusetts to send all of our team to trainings to teach them
what
about.
training were they going through?
So they were going through a sort of proprietary training with these consultants that was about restaurant business benchmarks, best practices, and reading and understanding the P&L.
Was this Zing Train?
It was similar to Zing Train. Okay. And that consultancy was called Rethink Restaurants. They're no longer operating, but much of what I learned from them is now carried forward with Prep Shift.
Nice.
But back in 2018, we sent everyone to training. I think the most shocking thing for the team was learning how little profit there is and how much you have to do with the little profit that there is.
There's something that hasn't been clearly stated about open book management to this point.
Sure.
Whereas, to your point, I think that employees just assume that the restaurant owner is making all this money and where's my cut?
That's
where's
right.
mine? So by doing open book management, you're getting vulnerable.
Right.
You're giving trust.
Right.
And in order to get trust, the best way to get it is to give it. And like think about a dog. Like when a dog meets you for the first time, what does it do? It usually like rolls over on its belly and exposes its underside, and it's getting vulnerable, so you know it's not a threat.
Right.
And like when you get that level of vulnerability and transparency, when you're not holding anything, when your genitals are being exposed to the world, like you're like, oh, like this level of trust just is so powerful.
Right. Yeah. And so just to go back to kind of bullet point these items, open book management, in my opinion, has kind of three major components. The first is that you teach the employees the basics of the business, the rules of the game, so to speak. The second thing you do is you actually show them the numbers. You make sure they understand the score.
Wait, what's the first rule? Say it again. I was too busy thinking about.
Sure.
I shouldn't have said what I said.
The first thing you do is teach them the rules of the game.
Got it.
The second thing you do is you make sure they know the score. You keep them updated.
Yes.
And then the third thing you do is create systems and opportunities for them to influence the win, and then to be paid out or, incentivized by that win. And so we have done all three of those parts back in 2018. And that, again, really shifted how our employees were thinking about the business. Because to your point, if they know that, going back a step, most employees have a pretty good grasp on like COGS, like what cost of goods are, like they see the ingredients, they work with them, that's tangible. And so if they know, okay, well, we only put 2 eggs in that sandwich and then we charge $9 for it, it would be reasonable for them to assume, if they haven't thought about it a lot, that I'm keeping all of that money.
Right.
And so one of the first activities we do in this training is we give them 100 pennies and we say, how many of these, like if this is our sales, how many of these pennies do you think we're spending? And how many of them do you think we're keeping? And the answer is like, we're spending 95 of them and we're keeping 5. And that is shocking to a lot of restaurant workers. And we had someone say, like, I never understood why we charged so much for an egg sandwich. And now I get it.
Yeah. So what are those unexpected expenses that people just don't take into consideration? Even the owners.
Sure. I mean,
I know which one's going through my mind right now.
Yeah. I think overheads are kind of invisible in a lot of ways. And there's so many of them and they add up. The other thing that I always want to emphasize with employees is employment taxes, because, they see how their paycheck shrinks after they pay their taxes. But what they don't know is that we also pay them more. So Uncle Sam is fucking both of us. He's taking a bite out of both sides.
It's already shrank once before it reaches you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think that when they understand that, there is a little bit less resentment when
there goes
the paycheck
15%,
shrinks. Exactly.
Right? Like off the top.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure.
And then we can also outline things that you might bucket into direct labor, like benefits, like health insurance, like staff meals. And then
rent.
I think, yes, rent is the huge one. Rent is like the most obvious of the overheads. Third-party fees. I could go all day talking about that, but I won't. Although I was in a Domino's commercial because it gave me the opportunity to skewer the third-party delivery providers. I was like, me and Domino's, that's a weird, those are odd bedfellows. But I think that, again, there are just so many little pieces, and when all you do is prep and sell the food, of course you're not exposed to all of that.
Right.
And so I think the thing that open book management created for us, again, was the abundance mindset, which is, it's not that if I give this to you, I'm losing it. I'm giving you information, and we're creating more together.
A bigger pie.
Yeah, exactly.
With the same amount of people, and we all get a bigger slice.
Exactly. And it also, it makes the operator not the enemy. Yeah. And I'm like such a people pleaser and like an empath that like being a hard ass about anything is really unpleasant for me. I hate feeling like the bad guy. And so if my employees know that like every kitchen towel costs whatever it costs, like then they know that if I'm saying like, please take 2 towels to start your day, it's not because I'm just like a towel hoarding asshole. It's because there are actual expenses associated with that. And if we break a stack of plates, we have to make that up somewhere.
Right.
And they actually know what that dollar amount is. That totally changes the dynamic.
Please don't clock in 10 minutes early.
Yeah.
Like that's death by 1,000 cuts. When you have 10 people doing that every day for a month, 10 times, 30, it adds up real fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I loved about open book management is that it gave us a framework to evaluate those wacky employee ideas that we had talked about before. And, I might roll my eyes if an employee came to me with like an idea for an event, for example, that I thought was a terrible idea. But open book management made me realize that I wasn't educating them. And so, of course, their ideas weren't cutting it for me. And so open book management lets you have that conversation in a way that's not personal, that is more objective, and that, again, aligns you around the goal, which is to create benefit to the company and for the employees to share in that.
I love this. So this is all happening 2017, rolling into 2018.
Yeah.
What Could you tell us how the needle moved during that time? And I'm not going to make you share actual numbers. I won't stop you. But if you want to share percent profit and like all that stuff, I'd be really interested to know before and after rolling out this new tool, how that impacted your bottom line.
Open book management, strictly speaking, did not make us more profitable, but it made us able to afford more of our values. We were able to make raises across the board. We added health insurance and 401ks. And so I won't say that the benefit was purely to the business, but it gave us more money to buy cool shit with.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think that's one of the things that's like fiscal responsibility. And one of your responsibilities is your people as an owner. And I think that is one of the core values I want to see, that if you open a business, you have a moral obligation to provide security to yourself, but most importantly to everybody your business touches.
Absolutely.
And if you do that, like you're currently doing, it's going to trickle up.
Right.
And it sounds like it's happening right now. The past year, you invested in this new facility. We haven't talked about that yet. Gorgeous facility, by the way.
Thank you.
And that enabled you to invest in yourself so you can go the distance,
right,
and far into the future. So I do want to talk about where you are today.
Yes.
What the past 2023 to 2024 look like, what the vision is, where you're going. There's two more things I want to cover before we get there. I want to talk about your brother and sister, selling their shares of the business to you, which sounded like that was in 2018. Jesus, I'm going way into the future now. 2018. And then in 2020, it seems like the next big morph change in your business, going from focusing on a restaurant and being more of an events company specialist in dumplings happened.
Right.
So those are the big things I want to cover.
Totally.
What time? We're going to take a break to thank our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to go to 2018.
We have to interrupt today's episode to let you know that every second and fourth Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, Restaurant Systems Pro CEO Fred Langley is going live to teach you everything you need to know to run a profitable restaurant from soup to nuts. All you got to do is click the link below.
We're back, and 2018 is I think a big evolution in the business. So what's going on where you're like, where it's becoming Irene's like ship, and like what just take us there.
Yeah, so in 2018 we executed the sale of my brother and sister's shares to me. And that was super exciting in a lot of ways. Of course, I wanted the power. I wanted to be able to make decisions without going to committee. Yeah. And I also wanted them to, I also wanted to thank and reward them with some cash for taking a chance on me as someone with almost no experience and really letting me create this brand according to my own values. Like, they didn't have to do that, and they probably shouldn't have. Like, they made a crazy gamble on me, and I felt like they deserved to be paid out for that. And so I think in a lot of ways it was the right next step for us. They also both had kids in those intervening years, and so there was this way in which I felt like I can't ask them to be business partners and parents to my nibblings. Like, if my brother's late because he was taking care of his son, how am I supposed to be pissed off at him about that? Like, I don't want that to be the equation that we're working with. And so let's just clear the books on that. And at the same time, we were implementing open book management. We were sharing financials with the team. We were simplifying a lot of operations as a result of that. And we were, merely making an effort to upskill everyone. And then on the brand side, we really centered in on leading with our values, especially around transparency and taking good care of each other.
What are your values?
our two main values at Mei Mei are generosity, that abundance mindset, and also being future focused. That we look to that horizon or multiple horizons, and continuous improvement is a huge part of
Kaizen.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your other values? So those are the two main ones, but are there other values that are listed?
Those are the Mei Mei values.
Okay.
I also kind of have personal values around, I think irreverence is a core value for me, that like we should laugh at each other and we should laugh at ourselves. And like, that's what makes all of this bearable in the end.
I love that.
And I think justice is also critical for me. That if I can't be proud of the work that I'm doing, if it's not creating a more just outcome, it's not what I'm supposed to be
that's
doing.
a finite game, right? So that's the infinite game.
Yes.
I apologize.
Yep, exactly.
Myself. And what are you familiar with that school of thought?
I am.
So
yeah.
What's your interpretation of that?
I think my interpretation, I mean, it's funny. It kind of goes back to generosity because of pie, right? Like we can make more pie.
Right.
And if we are thinking zero sum, if we are thinking finite, I don't know, like it feels bad. Part of what I'm trying to say is like, what I get out of the business has to work for me.
Right.
And that's how the core values for me as a person fit into the core values of the business. And I haven't read Simon Sinek in a long time. I'm realizing I'm probably not answering your question very well.
This is, I think, one of his newer books. It's called The Infinite Game. I don't know where it falls in the timeline, but it's new in my world.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the my clearest understanding is a finite game has an end. I want to be number one.
Right.
I want to like. We want to get this award. We want to get that.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is people get there and then they go, now what?
Totally.
And they also realize that like I think like Microsoft was a good example of a finite game.
Right. That's
like,
that's the like the
an Apple is an infinite game.
Right.
Like and like we saw how that played out.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So it's just the idea of an infinite game is that there is no end.
Right.
That it's the objective is it's infinite.
Right.
It's there like you'll never get there.
Right.
And it makes the world better somehow.
Yes. And that's the Microsoft Apple example is the one that I'm most familiar with. And I think that for me, and this is going into the future a little bit, but stepping away from Mei Mei, bringing on 2 new partners, that was necessary to bring myself to the infinite mentality around Mei Mei. Because now people will ask me, like, what's your vision for Mei Mei? And I say, like, that's not up to me anymore. That's up to my managing partners, Annie and Alyssa, 2 incredible, brilliant, really hardworking women. I'm not going to set that agenda anymore. I'm going to stay around and, help kind of steward the brand and maintain the values and provide leadership and be a resource. But I'm not going to define that in my own way anymore.
Right.
That's up to a bigger group of people.
So I think what you're getting into right now is a book that I just recently finished. It's called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And they identify that you need to focus on the 20% of things that only you can do and nobody can do them like you, and then you outsource the rest of the 80%.
Yeah.
So for you, what is that 20%? Like, what is the future, not for Mei Mei, but for Irene? Like, where are you putting your energy today?
Yeah, I think that I think vulnerability is one of my superpowers. Sharing my books to the public, thanking my therapist in my James Beard acceptance speech, trying to relate to people. That's one of the things that I think I do really well. And in my work with Prep Shift now, that is extremely important because restaurant owners, we are, I think, by nature, not all that trusting. And being able to build rapport with our clients is so, so important because they don't have time to lose.
Right.
I think the other thing that I have more recently embraced is how to turn the generosity mindset into a brand campaign or into a PR stunt that is fulfilling to me and also creates some sort of benefit to Mei Mei. So one example of this, my big project last year was called Dumpling Disloyalty. Big campaign that we ran, and we basically told our guests, thank you for your loyalty to Mei Mei. In the month of May, which is AAPI Heritage Month, we invite you to practice disloyalty by going to 8 other AAPI-owned businesses and ordering some kind of dumpling. And then come back to Mei Mei, show us your receipts, and your next order of dumplings is free.
What's the objective there?
The objective there is to say, we believe in sharing. And we believe that, like, it's great if Mei Mei is your favorite dumpling, but we just want everyone to eat more dumplings. We can create more for everybody when we encourage our guests to explore. And we can support other businesses because it's not, there's enough pie.
Yeah.
And that was something that that was a concept I had been working on for a long time. It's inspired by the espresso disloyalty card that Gwilym Davis, who's like a 2005 world barista champion, he said, I love that people come to my shop, but let me give you a disloyalty punch card that has all my friends' shops on it.
Yes.
And then you can bring that to me, and I will say thank you for supporting our ecosystem. Thank you for supporting our industry beyond just my business.
Right. And again, I think this goes back to the proof is in the pudding that this industry has the ability to change the world. Because it's I feel like there's just people that are drawn to this industry are very values driven individuals.
Right.
And we're influencers.
Right.
And we can and not just not make it about the transaction of that dining experience, but like being a part of that community.
Right.
And creating awareness. And
Yep.
And I think these are just, so it's tying that into what I'm hearing from you is brand publicity stunts.
Yep.
The values, not just making it about bottom line,
Right.
or top line revenue, but really injecting your values into society and
Right.
using that to be your North Star.
Yeah, and I think, it creates so much fun.
Yeah.
Like, our guests emailed us and said, like, I went to a bunch of restaurants I'd never been to before, and, like, I want to go back there. And when I hear that, I don't think, like, oh, that means they're not going to come to Mei Mei as much. Like, I think that's great because part of my vision is a really healthy, thriving, independent restaurant industry. Especially during COVID, I realized, like, if Mei Mei doesn't survive this, like, that's too bad.
Yeah.
But if all the mom and pops close, if all of the chef-owned restaurants with unique culinary perspectives close, like, then I'm going to be really fucking pissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, like, I can't eat Taco Bell every day when I'm 90. That's just not going to work.
I want to finish today's conversation addressing that problem. How do we make sure that never happens?
Right.
We're one step away from getting there.
I'm always one step away.
2020.
Yep.
It seems like this really evolutionary point in your business where you go from focusing on being a traditional restaurant to completely changing your business model.
Right.
What's going on during 2020? I mean, we don't need to get into the pandemic. I'm sure that helped influence the pivot. Like, we all know.
Yeah.
But, like, take from the business, like, just purely business perspective, why did you make that change?
Well, the question was, if our guests can't come to us, how do we get to them? We knew that dumplings were the most compelling thing on our menu.
Yeah, your greatest hits.
Yes. And so we actually had a guest, he came to the front door, he hollered into the restaurant, he was wearing his mask. He said, would you ever come to my local farmer's market and sell your food? I think you would do really, really well. And I remember thinking to myself, that sounds awful. Like, startups go to farmers markets.
Yeah.
Food trucks go to farmers markets. Like, that's not who we are anymore, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And Annie and Alyssa, my business partners, basically said, like, Irene, it's COVID. Everyone's a fucking startup again.
Yeah.
So, like,
Again,
put on your big girl pants
bottom
and, like,
up.
we got to go do it.
Yeah.
And we went to that farmer's market, and we had to send our van back to the restaurant to restock twice.
Wow.
And, just think back to, like, the depths of COVID. Like, we were trying so many things. We were throwing everything at the wall, and nothing was sticking well enough except for this. And so it felt like a miracle to have a demand signal so strong. And so that's when we decided to shift everything to sell directly to our customers through farmers markets. And the obvious choice for that was dumplings.
So when did this bleed beyond the pandemic and really change the business model for what you are today? Like, what? So basically, I'm assuming that by putting all of your energy into the dumplings, you streamline process. You're probably paying attention to the numbers. Oh shit, bottom line's going up, and our labor is probably going down too,
Right.
because we're putting all this energy, units of work, into doing one thing. eliminating things that are just costing us stuff where there's no top line opportunity there right now.
There was a confluence of factors, I think, that really made that shift permanent.
Oh, something smells good right now.
Yeah,
Is
it
that
really
garlic?
does. Yes.
Sorry.
Can't wait.
ADD again. Keep going.
I think one thing that was really critical was that our lease on our restaurant space was coming up on 10 years.
Okay.
And we were not going to stay
Why not?
because of our landlord.
Okay.
Love you, Patty. But didn't want to stay there. And so we knew that if we wanted the business to continue, we needed to open a new space. And then the question becomes, are we going to try to do what we did before, or are we going to do something totally different? I was so emotionally exhausted from the pandemic. To be totally honest, without Annie and Alyssa, I probably would have closed the business.
Thank you,
We
Annie
had
and
also,
Alyssa.
yeah, we had also just paid off the last of our debt.
Wow, congratulations.
And so the idea of opening another restaurant to do the same thing was like I just did that.
Yeah.
I don't want to fucking do it again. Sure, we're smarter and older and whatever, but that does not sound good to me.
Right.
Let's try something else. And so Annie and Alyssa really saw this path to retaining so much of the brand identity, but having a different business model, a different economic model. And I was so happy to let them run with it.
Yeah. So what is the business model today? What is the vision they had then?
Yes. So the business model is a combination of classes and dumplings. Those dumplings are available for retail. We have wholesale customers, and we also serve them here in the restaurant. But the restaurant is now a fraction of what we do relative to before.
Okay. So I'm just making notes.
Sure.
Retail, wholesale.
Wholesale.
And looking at the classes. So like what, if you were to break it down from retail, wholesale, and classes, those are your three revenue streams right now, so you have to say?
Retail, retail would have kind of two subsections.
Okay.
One of them is the restaurant, and one of them is like product retail, direct to consumer.
So like
retail.
delivery and going in like on the
Farmers
shelves.
markets.
Farmers markets.
Yeah.
Okay. Are they in stores?
Yes.
So,
Which would be considered wholesale.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right.
We have our own kind of terminology that may or may not map onto how other businesses think
So when
about
you say
this.
retail, you're talking about in-store sales.
Yep.
And farmers market at your stand.
Yes.
Through your channels
Exactly.
that you own.
Yep.
Wholesale is you're selling to other restaurants?
We sell to other restaurants and like food service operations, like we sell to TD Garden, and we sell to shops.
Got it. What kind of shops? Like specialty food
Mostly,
shops?
yeah, specialty grocers.
Got it. And then with the classes, so retail, wholesale, classes.
Yes.
If you were to do a marketing mix, what percentage of revenue comes from those three different legs?
Right now, I would say it's probably a third across the board.
Okay.
We're aiming for wholesale to make up a bigger piece of that, but we just got our USDA kind of full inspection a couple of months ago. So that's where we're really ramping right now.
Yeah, you got this facility now too.
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So why wholesale? Is that where there's most opportunity for like ceiling?
Wholesale is definitely where we can scale the most. At the same time, what we have learned about kind of, big box grocery store margins is that they suck and that our product, because it is, premium, we can't compete on price. And so we have to compete on quality, and we have to be going to the stores where our demographic shops.
Where those values are shared.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the farmer's market is a great place for that because we are selective about our ingredients. That's the perfect place for us to sell our product. And we still do amazing farmer's market sales. And we have a couple staff who are out right now at markets and are going to come back with empty coolers.
So two thoughts going through my head. I mentioned I'm like hot on 10X is easier than 2X because it's the most recent book I read.
Yeah.
But like you started to focus on what you can uniquely do within your restaurant and to get out of the way and surround yourself with the other people. You got to think about your restaurant as being an entity, and what is my restaurant uniquely set up to do better than everybody else?
Yeah.
What 20% can we focus on that will help us be even more efficient? So for you, that was dumplings.
Yes.
And again, you took your greatest hits, right? Like, what if we had to bring one thing to a farmer's market? What best represents us?
Totally.
If you're listening to this right now, ask yourself that question. What
Right.
are you known for? What makes up 20% of your sales or 25% of your total sales or maybe more? Like,
Totally.
what is the one thing that people come to you to do? What would happen if you eliminated everything else and just did that?
Yes. I
What-
love that
What would
question.
happen, right?
And I also think that what got you here won't get you there. And when we opened Mei Mei, we were unique, and we are not unique now. Or that concept is not unique now.
Yeah.
And so, we have to adapt. I think also, like, in my 20s, I was a lot more game to be running a full-time restaurant business. And I'm older.
Right.
And so there were so many ways in which the market was telling us not to try to do the same thing over again. Our own hearts were telling us that, and it just ended up making sense. And so here we are in this incredible space.
Yeah. You said something else really that I just want to bring light to it real quick, that you started, I think that we get guilty of this, where our restaurant is an extension of us. And you have to realize at some point that might not be what your dream was then might not be your dream tomorrow.
Yeah.
And if your restaurant becomes dependent on you,
Right.
then you're really not creating a recipe for success.
Yeah.
And I think that realizing that you're treating your restaurant like an entity that can go on and become its own and grow beyond you,
Right.
and I think you had that foresight, which is really important too. So one more thing about your mix right now.
Yeah.
I want to go a layer deeper with the classes, because I think this
Sure.
is the element that taps the most into the experience economy, which is
Right.
where we're heading.
Yes.
And I had the author Joe Pine on the show of the experience economy.
Mm-hmm.
So many lessons there. But like really kind of break down how you landed on your value, because I mean these prices are public.
Yep.
So you have dumpling classes, $88 for 2 hours. Scallion pancake class, $78 for 2 hours. Noodle class, $120. And then you have host classes, which are 2.5 for $105. So how do you know, like, how did you settle on those rates? Like, how do you even go about engineering that?
The margin on classes is so strong that as long as we are covering our costs and the guest is willing to pay, we're happy with it.
Yeah.
8 is a lucky number in Chinese culture.
Okay.
So, if your favorite Chinese restaurant has a lot of 8s in their phone number, they chose that. They were like,
Okay.
this is sick. And so we have been actually charging $88 for classes since before the pandemic.
Okay.
We haven't raised that price. And we took classes online during COVID. That is actually what helped us bridge the gap between before times Mei Mei and opening this space. We did so much revenue in classes because people couldn't convene in person, and so they were
Something to
doing
do.
happy hours.
Yeah.
They were doing Zoom events, and the dumpling classes were just such a novelty, fun for the whole family. You got dinner ready by the end of it. It just it hit the mark in so many ways.
Yeah, that's where Restaurant Unstoppable Network was born, out of the pandemic, of doing how do I continue to create content.
Totally.
Yeah. So did I cut you short?
No.
Okay. So how many people per class typically?
We can accommodate up to 30 people in a
Wow.
class. For our public classes, we typically cap them at 18
So public classes versus what?
versus private classes. So we do classes for corporate clients, for social events, or you can just buy a ticket to a class on any night that's listed and come in and you'll be with whoever happened to buy a ticket to the same class.
Do you sell out often?
Yes.
How often? What percentage of time would you say you sell out?
Well, we have a lot of capacity to add more classes. I would say that 80% of classes are typically sell out.
So what's an average between the 18, let's say 25 people per class between averaging out private and public?
Yeah, private has a different pricing structure to it.
I'm just trying to get a ballpark of how much money potential revenue is. I'm just trying to give the listeners an idea of, like, there's money here.
Yes, definitely. I wish Devin were here.
I'm just gonna pick
since he's our class manager. But
one
yeah,
channel.
pick one. Yeah.
Yeah, one channel. We'll say which is your most popular class?
Let's talk about public classes. I think that's the easiest.
Dumplings?
Yes.
Okay, so $88 for 2 hours.
Yep.
30 people.
Let's say 20.
Okay. 88 times 20 is 1,760. How many days of the week do you do that?
We typically do about 4 classes a week.
Times 4. What is your operational cost? Like, who do you have to pay to do that?
So we have instructors who make $35 an hour.
So minus how many instructors per class?
Let's say 2.
So minus 140. And what are your other cost of goods? Or
Cost of goods is minimal. I would say maybe
flour?
Yeah,
meat.
I mean, probably 10%.
So 10% of the 740?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're profiting, quote unquote, $6,160
Right.
for 2 hours of work.
Gross profit, baby. And
Yeah.
so the other
That's
thing
just one class.
about classes that is incredible.
And you're like, God damn it, I should shut up now because this is
Hey
the,
man,
the
everyone's
fear base,
invited.
right?
So the other thing about classes is that we are selling people on Mei Mei the whole time.
Yeah.
Like they are a captive audience and we are marketing to them about our business.
Yeah. So what is the experience you're creating here? If like, what are you selling?
I think we are selling, number one, a sort of like demystification of a cooking experience that a lot of people are intimidated by. Like the idea of making dumplings from scratch for a lot of folks is just like, I could never do that.
Right.
The other thing we're selling is a group experience. If you come with a date, if you come with your grandma, if you're with your friends from work.
A unique experience.
Yes. And that also, cooking with people, I think evokes so many memories in the average consumer. For me, the classes are modeled after the ways that we would cook at home and invite everybody over to my parents' house. Everyone would sit around the table and make dumplings. We would all eat together and we would take dumplings home with us. Yeah. And so I think that the hands-on element of that is a different way of connecting. Like it's not just a cocktail hour, right? You're actually doing something together, producing something together. And then we've crafted the classes to be really foolproof. So even if you have very little experience cooking, you are going to have, a very high feeling of self-efficacy by the end.
And I think the only thing that I haven't heard is education. You're teaching people a new skill.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're also teaching them why we charge a lot of money for dumplings.
Yeah. But there's value in all those things that you listed.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to start thinking is, what is the value of what I'm giving you?
Right.
Like I'm giving you this memory you're always going to have.
Right.
I'm giving you a new skill that you can take and go on and like break the ice. And
yes.
like, these are all value add things. And this is how all restaurants should be thinking going forward in my mind is know your value and know how you can create unique experiences to leverage that value.
Right.
And the only other thing I want to tap into around the current business model is like, what are you building this on? Because you had to figure it out, right? Like, you go to the website, there's classes listed, but like, what's the framework, the systems, the technology behind all that's making it all work? That's what I'm curious about.
Well, we're still on Toast after 11 years. And we are a super Google Drive based business. We use Trello for the management team. We use Fair Harbor for ticket sales.
That's the one I was curious about.
Yeah, we just switched over from Eventbrite.
Okay. Why did you make that switch?
You'd have to ask the team.
Okay.
I'm not in the loop on that. I think
you.
probably, thank God. That's how you know you've made it. But we really, I think, are constantly refining things. We use Squarespace for our website. We are on Toast Takeout and DoorDash. We use QuickBooks, of course.
What's the integration between Squarespace and Toast look like?
There's not much of one.
Okay.
Yeah, it just links out
to
like our takeout order page.
Got it.
Yeah.
Am I pushing the envelope here?
No.
Good. Well, then I should keep going.
Yeah.
No, honestly, I'm looking at the time. We're at an hour and 42 minutes of recording. We're 17 minutes beyond our agreed time together. I got here 40 minutes for the record, people. 40 minutes early. Boston during St. Patrick's Day weekend.
We're in Southie, baby.
With a 3/4 ton pickup truck.
It's like Christmas.
Trying to find parking was scary. We made it happen.
That was a good bonding experience for us,
it
Eric.
was. Irene saved me. She had to stand in a parking spot for I don't know how long I knew you were standing.
Nothing I haven't done before.
So the only other thing I want to kind of really get out is like this idea of like looking into the future. Like I think we've identified a lot of issues. We kind of started today's conversation how I end it.
Yeah.
But in terms of like peering into the future of Mei Mei, the future of Irene, what hasn't come out of today's conversation that you would like to get out?
I just want food to do good things. And that's what ties together, I think, all of the various projects that I work on. I published a book with my sister last year about reducing food waste. That feels totally left field in a lot of ways. I serve on the boards of 3 different nonprofits. That is not directly tied to Mei Mei in any way. But all of it is about how we can leverage food to create a better world and not let food be part of what makes our world so difficult for so many people.
Are you trying to change the world with the restaurant industry? Can we be friends forever? I think we need to.
I mean, we have to stick together.
For sure. No, I love it. I really do. And I can totally get behind that. If I cut you short, I apologize.
No, not at all. I mean, the only other thing I would add is like my work now with Prep Shift, which is my quote unquote day job. People come to Mei Mei and they're like, wow, Irene, like, look at all of this. And I'm like, yeah, I don't do this isn't me. Like, this is our incredible fucking team.
Yeah.
And my day job is around supporting other entrepreneurs. I don't want anyone to have to make the mistakes I made. But if they're like me and they're stubborn, I'll be there with them through it. I have 2 incredible partners at Prep Shift, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses, of course. And I just want to make sure that when I'm old, there's cool shit for me to eat.
What's the vision of Prep Shift?
The vision of Prep Shift is a restaurant industry that works for everyone, meaning owners and operators, of course, guests also, of course, and workers as well, where independent businesses can thrive and where we are not totally overrun by chains. Yeah.
Why do you think it's not good to be overrun by chains?
I mean, I think to be overrun by chains takes a lot of power and flavor out of our local economy
Resources.
Here.
Yeah.
If all of the profits go to some central office that is not in Boston, that is a business owner who does not have the same stake in our community.
Yeah.
I also think that there are so many kinds of food that you still can't find in Boston because the restaurant industry is not really an entry point into the American dream the way it was when my grandparents had a restaurant. And my grandparents, mind you, they raised doctors and lawyers, and now I'm back here making them proud. But I want us to be able to still have unique experiences, to try novel things. And so many of the chains that are doing well in Boston feel like more of the same. So, I mean, again, like somehow it all boils back down to like
it's
me
that,
as a diner having
right.
a great time.
I think back again, it's that yin and that yang.
Yeah.
And I think both sides, there's right to it.
Yes.
Right. And I think it's a matter of collectively trying to find that sweet spot.
Yeah.
That optimum point of like you're getting the best of both worlds.
Totally. I think there's a balance.
I don't know where it is yet. I'm still trying to find it.
Yeah. And I think that the balance is tricky because the odds are stacked so terribly against independence.
Right.
And I would love to see chains that do better than the status quo. And I think that world is also possible.
I think conscious capitalism is definitely playing a role in this, where people are choosing to be small.
Yeah.
Small Giants is an organization.
Totally. Yeah.
I don't know. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Bo Burlingham. Great book, Small Giants. Check it out. But it's this idea of like realizing that the big chains of the world are playing the finite game.
Right.
And that there's more out of this life than being number one and being
Totally.
the biggest and making the most money. There's the intangible things that we all need to be human that we've lost sight of. And the more we learn about human nature and we look into our past and like biological evolution, psychological evolution, like we're realizing what it takes to be happy. And I think it's a matter of going with the grain instead of against it.
Yeah, I think so. And for me,
This got so quiet.
the compressor turned off. Yeah. Part of what makes Mei Mei is that we're here. We're in Boston, and we are in the city where I grew up. We work with the farms that we work with, and I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine Mei Mei somewhere else.
Yeah.
It would just be different. And so that sense of place, I think, is critical to our identity.
Irene, this has been so much fun.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
This has been
We're
amazing.
going to start to wrap it up. I got a few more questions for you.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything that you want to get out that did not come out now.
No, I don't think so.
Cool. What is one thing about your business, a value, a process, a system that's truly uncommon and makes you unstoppable?
I think this is uncommon. We have a policy called Surprise and Delight. And for our farmers market staff, they are asked to give away 2 to 3 packs of dumplings for free at every market. It's actually a quota that they have to hit. And it can be for any reason. You look like you're having a bad day. You can't decide between 2 flavors. You've never tried dumplings before. They get to use their own discretion. And in the cafe, we also make comps and sends to people. I think that is more common in a restaurant. But we, again, are trying to lead with that generosity and that sense of wanting to share and creating relationships with people who come back to us and tell us what an impact it had on them. And of course, it also has an impact on the staff, right? Like when you're asked to be generous instead of asked to hoard. And so I think that's one of the ways that we build our brand. We exercise our values and ask and empower our staff to do the same.
I love that you use, I was going to say, I was just going to follow up with that. Like, your values aren't what you put on paper and you say you are. It's what you do every day.
Right.
And you have to give people outlets to live the values.
Yeah. And I think that, there's nothing like being proud of your job.
Yeah.
And that's a luxury for a lot of people. And I don't know how common it is in the restaurant industry. And I believe and I hope that people who work here are proud of it because they get to practice their best selves.
I love that. The mission statement is to change the world by inspiring, empowering, and transforming the industry. How have you personally transformed?
In a lot of ways, I trust myself a lot more. And I have learned that trusting your gut, for me, I'll speak for myself, trusting my gut is always the best option. Because if you're wrong, you can still say, I made the right choice for me and it was wrong. I think when I have made choices that I felt like were informed by other people or by, outside standards, that's when I felt that the choice was not really defensible. And there's a certain amount of regret you can have for a wrong choice, but I think for not trusting yourself, that regret is really hard to live with.
This is the last question. Open your ears. It's a doozy. If you got the news, you'd be leaving this world tomorrow. All the memories of you, your work, and your restaurants will be lost with your departure, with the exception of 3 pieces of wisdom you could leave behind for the good of humanity and your legacy. What would those 3 pieces of wisdom be? I know one of them. I'm guessing at least.
I think number 1 would be try to say yes.
Ooh.
Number 2 would be to lead with generosity.
Yes. That was the one I was thinking about.
And number 3 would probably be that you can keep a bag in your freezer and all of the bruised fruit and leftover oatmeal that you or your kids don't eat makes a really good ingredient for a smoothie in the future. And then if you don't finish the smoothie, you can put it into a popsicle mold.
Nice. That is a great one. And I do want to say thank you for saying yes to me.
Yeah.
And thank you for opening your doors to your world and letting me share your story and your knowledge and your values and your perspective. This was really a fun conversation for me, and it really a shining example of what I'm trying to do.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. The pleasure was mine. And how can we connect with you if we really enjoyed today's conversation and we want to maybe check out Prep Shift? What's the best way to connect?
The best way to find Prep Shift is to go to prepshift.co, either on your browser or on Instagram. And you can find me at Irene Li, which is spelled IRENE SHIANGLI. That's my full name. Have to give credit to my mom's maiden name in there. Or you can visit us at Mei Mei Dumplings.
Awesome. In social handles, did you throw that in there? Was that the long drawn out one that you just gave us?
I'm sorry?
Instagram social handle?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
making sure that's what that was.
Yeah.
This is the absolute last question. Then we're gonna be done. And I'm really trying to have this question be what steers the North. Like, this is our North Star. Who do you respect and admire in the industry? Somebody who you know has a lot of the values we discussed today, who is profitable, they have the fiscal responsibility, but they're also taking care of their people and creating great cultures and needs to be made an example of. Who is that for you?
Well, I know you're heading south, and I have two recommendations.
Yes.
One is my really dear friends Corey and Schwei at Jackrabbit Philly in Charleston, South Carolina. They also just opened a new barbecue restaurant called King, which looks to die for. And the other recommendation is my friend Elizabeth Tilton, who runs a company called Oyster Sunday, which provides different services, including an incredible employee benefits platform to restaurant workers. And she's based in New Orleans.
Oh,
so
beautiful.
hopefully those stops will be part of your big journey.
And I was trying to get the names of the restaurants. Hit me with the names one more time.
Yep, Jackrabbit Philly
Yep.
and King.
Got it. And I meant the names of the people.
Oh, Corey, Corrie, and Schwei, Shuai.
Got it. Look out, folks. I'm coming after you. I'd love to get you on the show, hopefully in the next couple of months. And this is where I say, Irene, there is no questioning. You are unstoppable. Thank you.
Thank you.